first few weeks, and above a certain level of maternal antibody, that pup should be well protected. But at some point in life, and it depends on the level of maternal antibody, at some time that puppy is going to become susceptible to parvovirus because the level of maternal antibody has dropped below the protective level. And that's what we're showing in the dotted red line there. So that's what happens. Now, what we try and do is we aim to vaccinate puppies at a time when the vaccine will break through whatever level of maternal antibody is present. We don't want to leave too big a time interval between the time the pup becomes susceptible to infection and the time we vaccinate. But the problem is that most of the vaccines that we're using, and this was a particular problem early on with parvovirus, but it's still a problem to a certain extent, is we're not able to break through high enough levels of maternal antibody to completely close that gap. And so we end up with a gap that we can't really close with many of the existing vaccines. So the puppy is, the level of maternal antibody will interfere with vaccination until it's reached a lower level than is protective. So we end up with this immunity gap that I'm showing in blue. And that's what we know about canine parvovirus vaccines. And that's been the case ever since we first started to vaccinate puppies against parvovirus. So, if we look at our own developments in terms of parvovirus vaccines, and the vaccine that we currently have on the market is what we refer to as our CPV 154 strain. This is in Puppy DP, the existing product. This is in the DHPPI and our DHP vaccine. So all our parvovirus vaccines are the same strain, this CPV 154. And it was developed in the 1980s, in the early 1980s. Isolated from originally a clinical case in the UK as the parvovirus, and then we developed it as a vaccine strain. It was a highly effective vaccine strain and particularly effective at breaking through maternal immunity. And it was found to be also very safe for use in young susceptible pups. So these are the particular properties of our existing 154 strain. It was able to protect pretty much 100% against clinical signs and shedding in the various studies we do. And we've also shown that it protects against all of the current field subtypes. So it protects against 2, 2A, 2B, and 2C. And one of its particular properties and why we developed it in those days and what we were very excited about was its ability to break through moderate levels of maternal antibody. And so this was originally launched in 1985 as Novivac Parvo-C. And this I'm showing the copy of the original launch brochure on the right-hand side. And this graph at the bottom is one of the studies that we carried out as part of the original development of the vaccine. And we were looking at the response in the face of maternal antibody by giving the vaccine to quite a large number of 6-week-old puppies in a particular breeding kennel where there was a lot of parvovirus was present, and these puppies had relatively high levels of parvovirus MDA. And so we were looking at how well the vaccine would break through the maternal antibody that was present. So along the bottom of this graph, we're looking at the level of maternal antibody from less than 20 HI units to 320, so at high levels of maternal antibody. These pups were all 6 weeks of age, and the scale on the y-axis is looking at the percentage of pups that responded to a single dose of vaccine of the 154 strain given at 6 weeks of age. And this is a graph we've shown many times over the years because this shows that the vaccine is capable of breaking through maternal antibody in 100% of cases for relatively low levels, or close to 100% for relatively low levels of maternal antibody, and even up to levels, moderate levels of 40, 80, even up to 160, we see considerable breakthrough of maternal antibody with a single dose of this parvo vaccine. And remember, these are 6-week-old puppies, so well before the normal finish of the primary course. So that's the performance of our existing vaccine in the face of maternal antibody. It breaks through moderate levels of maternal antibody. And we developed this vaccine, and we launched, a few years after we developed the vaccine, we launched a Puppy DP product, which was this combination of distemper and parvovirus, and contains our existing strain of distemper that we have in all of our other vaccine range, along with the 154 vaccine. So this is a combination of our distemper component, which we also have in DHPPI and DHP, and also our parvo component. It's designed for use in very young pups at around 6 weeks or even younger, and it was launched back in 1989. So this is the puppy DP vaccine that we've had on the market now for quite a few years. And the difference from the normal vaccines, from the distemper component in the DHPPI and DHP, is that the distemper component in the puppy DP vaccine has a minimum release titer which is 10 times higher than the titer we put in our DHP and DHPPI. And that's this figure of 10 to the 5 that I'm showing here for the distemper. And that is done to ensure that we improve the ability of the vaccine to break through distemper MDA, as well as the parvo component, which breaks through MDA very effectively. So this was originally the puppy DP vaccine, launched in 1989, and is still on the market, and that we still use it widely and in many countries worldwide. And what impact did this 154 vaccine strain have on this maternal antibody picture that I showed before? So if we look at the situation before we launched the 154 strain in the mid-1980s, this was the picture that we were seeing. So maternal antibody was present, and it was present in quite high levels, and it was decaying, as you know. And up to a certain level, maternal antibody was protective. So in this particular graph, it was protective up until around 9 weeks of age in this example, shown by the first red arrow. Initial vaccines that were developed very early on, these were what I refer to as the first generation vaccines, were not that effective at breaking through maternal antibody. So they would only break through very low levels. They were only capable of breaking through extremely low levels of maternal antibody. So we ended up with quite a wide window of susceptibility between those two arrows. And in fact, this was the reason why puppies had to be vaccinated repeatedly, sometimes up to 22 or 24 weeks of age, because we didn't know in each individual case when the vaccines were going to work, but we knew that they weren't that effective. So we had to carry on vaccinating for a long time after the normal finish of the primary course. So this was the picture originally before the 154 strain, before Parvo C. What we were able to do with our Parvo C strain was that we were able to break through much higher levels of maternal immunity. It would work in a much earlier in the life of the puppy. And that meant that the vaccine was closing that window of susceptibility. So instead of having a large gap there, we've got a much smaller gap in between those two arrows. And we could then bring back the final vaccination of the primary course to the traditional 12-week stage, as is shown here. So this was what the 154 strain, what our Parvo C component was able to do from about 1985 when we launched it onwards. So this was the revolution that we really had with that strain. So what I'm going to show you now is the next stage in this process and an improvement on even our 154. And we've been able to do that now and introduce that in this new vaccine, which is Novivac DP+. So this is a really innovative breakthrough in puppy protection. So what does this vaccine contain? Well, as you might guess from the name, it's Novivac DP+, so it contains a combination of distemper and parvo. So in that sense, it's the same as the puppy DP, but the parvo component is a very different component from our 154 strain, as I'll show you in the next few slides. So this is a live bivalent vaccine. It contains the same distemper virus strain as I've just talked about, and the same one that we have in the rest of the range. So this is an Ondestaport strain, and it's contained in this vaccine at a high titer. So it's a minimum titer of 10 to the 5.1. And that's very similar to the existing vaccine, the puppy DP. So there's very little difference in the distemper component. But what we have is a brand new parvovirus strain. So for the first time, we have developed an innovative new parvovirus strain for this vaccine, and we refer to this as the 630A strain, so the 630A strain. And it's actually a recombinant strain. What we've done is we've taken the backbone, if you like, of the existing 154 parvo strain, because we know that strain and we know that strain is safe in puppies, and it also has a number of unique properties that we wanted to retain. So we use the backbone of the 154, but into that we have inserted a capsid belonging to a very recent field strain, in fact, a 2C field strain. So it's a combination of our 154 and a 2C capsid, and I can show this diagrammatically on the diagram on the right-hand side. You can see that the non-structural proteins and the ends of the genome are from the 154 strain, but the capsid is taken from a field 2C strain. So this is the new 630A strain. It's a recombinant strain, and it's a brand new parvovirus strain that we introduced with DP+. And I'm just going to give you a little overview of the DP+. These are some of the some of the key information taken from the product leaflet and the summary of product characteristics. It's been authorized as a Central European authorization relatively recently. And this is some of the information that you'll see on the leaflet for this vaccine. And what I've done, is just looked at this. I'll focus on some of the key points that we'll talk about. So it's a freeze-dried vaccine with solvent for resuspension. It's a combination of distemper, the existing distemper component, and the live canine parvovirus 630A strain that I mentioned. And that's at a titer of 10 to the 5.1 to 10 to the 6.7. So actually a lower titer than we have for our existing 154. But it is much, much more effective, as I'll show you later. The vaccine is a straightforward 1 ml dose, so that's identical to the existing vaccines, and it's given subcutaneously from 4 weeks of age. So we have a clear 4-week minimum age claim for this, so it can be used in very, very young pups. And we have an onset of immunity of 7 days for distemper, which is the same as we've got for our existing vaccines, but only 3 days for parvovirus. So this new parvo component has a very rapid onset of immunity of only 3 days. There is no vaccine anywhere else that has a licensed onset of immunity of only 3 days, no injectable vaccine. This is something that we've only seen up to now with the intranasal vaccines, which stimulate a rapid local immunity. But here we have an injectable parvovirus vaccine, which stimulates a protective immunity within only 3 days. And I'll talk a bit about that later. The efficacy claims are extremely solid. We have full prevention of clinical signs, mortality and shedding for both distemper and parvo. So I can't imagine any more powerful efficacy claims. We've shown that this provides complete protection against clinical signs, mortality and shedding of virus after challenge. And the efficacy in the face of maternal antibody, and this is what we're particularly excited about here, distemper component is the same, so we know that breaks through maternal antibody very well, and we know that moderate levels of maternal antibody it can break through, but higher levels can reduce the efficacy of the distemper component, and that's something we've seen and we are aware of. But the parvovirus component has an extremely strong ability to break through maternal antibody. And we can see that statement there. Maternally derived antibodies do not interfere with the efficacy of this product. And you won't see a more powerful statement. This breaks through any level of maternal antibody from 4 weeks of age onwards, this parvo component. So that's absolutely groundbreaking achievement to find a vaccine that can break through maternal antibody, not just in older pups at 8 weeks of age or older, not even in 6-week-old pups, but from 4 weeks of age. And that's what we're particularly pleased about with this vaccine. So, and as you would imagine, the other statements are as you would expect. So safety-wise, it's a freeze-dried vaccine with no adjuvant, so there's no particular safety problem that you would expect, the same as all the other vaccines. This is a puppy vaccine, so we haven't carried out any safety studies in pregnant bitches, but we would not be using this type of vaccine, which is aimed at 4 to 6 week puppies, obviously in pregnant bitches. So there's no work been done at this point in time. But the efficacy is what I want to draw your attention to, because these are very, very powerful efficacy claims for the parvo component particularly. So I'm just going to show a little bit of the data that we've generated for this vaccine, just to show you some of the efficacy that we've achieved against parvovirus. And this is the new component, and this is the one I'm going to focus on. So this 3-day onset of immunity. Now, when we do onset of immunity studies, I should point out that these are always carried out in puppies with no maternal antibody. This is assessing the speed of onset of the immune response. We always, and every other company carries these out in puppies with no maternal antibody. So this is the ideal situation, but it really shows how swiftly this vaccine will stimulate an immunity if there's no interference at all. And so in this study, we took very young puppies, 4-week-old puppies, and they were challenged. So this was actually a challenge study demonstrating clinical protection. And they were actually challenged with a virulent field strain, in this case a 2C strain, 3 days after vaccination with a minimal titer dose of Novivac DP+. And obviously we had a control group that were unvaccinated for comparison as normal in these studies. And these graphs, firstly, are showing clinical signs on the left-hand side and shedding of virus post-vaccination, shedding of the challenge virus, shedding of challenge virus post-challenge in both groups of pups. So the DP plus vaccinated pups are in the purple line, and the controls, the unvaccinated controls, are showing on the blue line on the right-hand side of each graph. And so what we can see is that in the vaccinated pups, there was no mortality and no clinical signs of parvovirus in any of those pups. So we had complete 100% protection against clinical signs of mortality, whereas the vaccinated pups, the unvaccinated pups, the controls, all developed severe signs and all had to be euthanized for welfare reasons a few days after challenge. So complete clinical protection. And also in the vaccinated pups on the graph on the right-hand side, we can see 100% prevention of shedding in the DP plus group. So this is showing prevention of shedding of the challenge virus. So the vaccine was able to completely prevent shedding of virus as well as provide complete clinical protection. And all of the unvaccinated controls not only had severe clinical signs, but also all of them shed virus post-challenge. So we got a very, very clean, very clear result showing complete protection in the vaccinated pups against clinical disease and also shedding of virus after challenge. And that was a 3-day challenge following vaccination. This study is looking at seroconversion in maternal antibody positive pups. So these are really the target group that we're interested in. These are the very young pups, and these were 4-week-old puppies which had moderate to high levels of maternal antibody. So not they weren't at the lower end of the spectrum, they were at the higher end of the antibody spectrum that we see in maternal in 4-week puppies. So these pups had very high levels of maternal antibody. They were typical 4-week-old puppies, and they were given a single minimum titer dose again of the Novivac DP+. And these pups were monitored serologically every few days, so very frequently, just to judge the response of the vaccine in terms of how effective it was at breaking through maternal antibody. So we were plotting to see when the pup would respond to that vaccine in the face of what were pretty high levels of maternal antibody. And these maternal antibody levels range from levels of 288 to 1664. So those are pretty high levels. And these were 4-week-old puppies. And they all responded, 100% response in the face of maternal antibody, as you can see in the graph on the right. So all the vaccinates broke through maternal antibody, even up to levels of well over 1,000, well over 1,500, 1664 was the maximum level in this study, and that's pretty high level of maternal antibody against parvovirus. So very, very effective at breaking through maternal antibody. And these were 4-week-old puppies. So that just shows how effective this vaccine is. And we also compared it with a number of competitor vaccines that are available on the market. As you can see in this graph on the right-hand side, we're looking at the ability of the vaccine again to break through maternal antibodies. So we have DP plus vaccinated puppies in one group, in the purple. We had 3 different competitor vaccines, vaccine A, B, and C. These are all vaccines designed for use in young puppies at this sort of age. And these puppies, in fact, were 6-week-old puppies, but they had appropriate levels of maternal antibody, and we needed to ensure that we got some response from the competitor vaccines just to show that there was a response in those groups. We can see along the bottom of the graph that the level of maternal antibody within the group and the range of maternal antibody. So they ranged from 72 to 576, titers of 72 to 576 in this study. But all groups had broadly similar ranges of maternal antibody. In some of the competitor vaccines, it didn't go up quite as high, but the highest levels of antibody were present both in the DP plus vaccinated pups and in many of the competitors. So it was a fair comparison between the different vaccines. And what the study showed is that 100% of the DP plus vaccinated puppies seroconverted in the face of even the highest levels of maternal antibody in that group, compared with only 50% of the pups in each of the competitor vaccine groups. And it was the pups, as you would imagine, with the higher levels of maternal antibody that failed to respond in the competitor group. So as you would expect, the puppies with the highest levels did not break through. The vaccine didn't stimulate an active immunity, and we saw only 50% response in each of the competitors. But for the DP+, all of the puppies responded to a single dose of vaccine. So just finishing up, coming to the end of the presentation now, and I just wanted to say a little bit about using the vaccine in practice. And what it looks like and how you would use this vaccine in terms of fitting it into your existing vaccination protocols. So firstly, the vaccine itself, as I've already seen, I think I've already shown you on some of the slides, it's a very typical 2-dose pack containing a freeze-dried vaccine vial and a vial with solvent, because this is used prior to other vaccines and prior to the use of the lepto vaccines that you would normally start much later. So these are the 4 to 6 week old puppies. So we provide standard solvent as we do for the existing puppy DP vaccine. So this is what the vaccine looks like. It has a similar cap color to the existing puppy DP. So it's an olive brown cap color. And the solvent, as with our other solvents, has the same red cap color. It's the same solvent as we use for our other injectable vaccines. It's 1 ml vials, and it comes in packs of 5 or 25 doses. As is said there, both freeze-dried vaccine and solvent are included in the pack. So you get 10 vials or 50 vials per pack, but 5 doses of vaccine or 25 doses of vaccine per pack. And in terms of the protocol and how the vaccine is designed to be used, this is a vaccine which should be used in very young puppies at 4 to 6 weeks of age, as I'm showing here. So it replaces the existing puppy DP, if you're familiar with using that vaccine. And this is given as the first vaccination that a young puppy receives before it starts its full primary course. And I'm showing in this chart that the primary course is starting in this case at around 8 weeks of age with the DHP and L4 vaccines and KC, if that's normally given in puppies. So from 8 weeks, you would normally start the typical primary course and perhaps 2 doses, then 8 and 12 weeks of age. I'm showing a 16-week dose, which is in line with key recommendations. This is not something that we recommend necessarily should be done, but a lot of people I know like to follow the independent guidelines, like the WSAVA guidelines. And there are a number of practices that are giving a 16-week vaccination as well, so I've included that as an optional. and then obviously the first annual booster. And then from then on, it will be, depending on whether you have 3-year duration of immunity and you make use of that, you may just be giving the Lepto and the KC, or you may be giving DHP, depending on how you use those vaccines. But the message I'm showing here is that this DP plus vaccine is given right at the start at 4 to 6 weeks of age. So it's given before all of the other normal vaccines as part of the primary course. So essentially it's being used as a standalone vaccine at that stage. So what impact is this vaccine having? And I'm just going back to this little animation that I showed some time ago when I explained what impact our original 154 strain had and the effect of that in breaking through maternal antibody, in closing, but not quite closing, that window of susceptibility, and in allowing the final dose of the primary course vaccination to be given at around 12 weeks of age at the typical time. So this is what we achieved with our 154, considerable breakthrough of maternal antibody, but I'll show you quickly now, just in the same way, the new leap in efficacy that we're achieving with this new parvo component in DP+. So if I just go back, this is what 154 was achieving, considerable breakthrough of maternal antibody, but still, in many cases, not able to completely close the window of susceptibility, and certainly not able to break through very high levels of maternal antibody at 4 weeks of age. But what we see now with the parvo component in DP+, is that we can establish an active immune response in puppies that still have very high levels of maternal antibody, and they're still well protected, in fact, by maternal antibody. So we're able, for the first time, to immunize puppies at a level of maternal antibody that is actually still protective. So we completely close that window of susceptibility with this new parvo component in Novivac DP+. And so really what we're claiming here, and quite rightly, is that we're able to now set a completely new standard of puppy care with this vaccine. We're getting very early parvovirus protection and with no interference from parvovirus MDA from 4 weeks of age. And that's something that we have never seen before with any vaccine. So this is the first time any vaccine has been able to achieve that. In puppies without maternal antibody interference, then we see a very rapid onset of immunity. So the most rapid onset of immunity claim, again, for any parvovirus vaccine, only 3 days onset of immunity. And this, in fact, is the first vaccine because it's a recombinant vaccine, but the capsid, which is what the immune system sees, is actually a 2C capsid. So it's also based on the latest 2C field strain, and it's the first parvovirus vaccine which is based on the latest 2C field strain. And in addition to all of these attributes associated with our brand new parvovirus component, we've combined that with our tried and trusted distemper component, which provides excellent efficacy both in very young puppies and also in older puppies and adults. So it's combined with our existing and trusted distemper component for the DP plus vaccine. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention here. And now I think we have time to answer a few questions. So I'm going to hand over to Jan, who's going to present some of the questions that you've been asking about this vaccine. Jan.
Thank you, David. Very good presentation indeed. I appreciate it and enjoyed it. I see that time to time it's really good to see such a comprehensive overview of key points which need to be considered when discussing prevention against parvoviruses and distemper, especially realizing that in some regions of our countries these two diseases almost disappear. So it's a good refresh for colleagues. As to the key features of Novivac DP Plus you presented in second part, these are really unique, I must say, and very promising, because speed and power of action is really outstanding, and we know and we already see in the field that it will be very much appreciated by veterinarians and breeders. and peace of mind delivered by the fact that the risk of immunity gap is minimal will be great starting point when discussing the use of this vaccine in the field. So, as you said, we have some time to go through questions raised by veterinary professionals in our region. I would like again to encourage the audience, don't hesitate and take this opportunity to ask David, our expert, what you wanted to know about prevention against these diseases or about these new vaccines. In the meantime, we can answer the questions we received in advance. We were able to collect during field discussions because in some countries this vaccine is already available. Feedback is very positive, but still veterinarians are very much interested in some points. So I wouldn't be afraid to say that vets are very curious, despite you already touched this point, David, but they simply want to know why this new strain is able to break through even high levels of MDA. What's the essence of such a strong immunogenicity? Can you reply it?
Yeah, I can comment on that. And it's an excellent question, and it's one that, yeah, as you say, we frequently get this sort of question, and this question from many veterinarians in many countries, because it is astonishing. I mean, it really is the ability of this vaccine to break through very high levels of maternal antibody against parvovirus. We've never seen this with any vaccine, so we are very excited about this, and it is a unique property compared to all other vaccines. So how does it do it? Is a great question. So what is happening here? We think, and we've studied this particular strain a lot, is that with many parvovirus strains, with typical parvovirus vaccines contain modified live virus strains, of course, nowadays. And those are very effective at stimulating immunity, and they're also pretty effective nowadays at breaking through maternal antibody. But they all go through a process of attenuation, which involves serial cell passage, culture in cell culture. So we grow the virus in cell culture, and the virus is attenuated in what we say a traditional manner. Involving passage through serial culture. So we put it into cells, we harvest the virus, we put it into another fresh cell culture, and that's a process called passage. And this process of serial passage is how viruses are traditionally attenuated. It happens with many different viruses, and over time that virus becomes less pathogenic and safer, and of course that's necessary. But it also weakens the virus. And this process of attenuation, although it's needed to make the virus safe in many cases, tends to weaken the virus and make it less able to induce an immune response in the animal, and also less able to break through maternal antibody. And that's the problem with the traditional process of virus production. The difference here is that this is a recombinant strain that we've produced like I showed in the slide. So it's a combination of our 154 virus backbone and a 2C capsid. But the difference is that we've introduced a couple of attenuating mutations, which mean that it's not passaged through cell culture. It doesn't need to be passaged. It is, I like to think of it as being made safe by design, because we've designed this virus from the very start to be absolutely safe. We understand what the attenuation process has done with our 154 strain, and we've ensured that those changes are included in this new virus from the very start. So we didn't culture it through different passages of cell culture. It was already safe because that's how we designed it at the recombinant stage. So what we've ended up with is a virus that we don't need to passage, and therefore it doesn't weaken the virus at all. This is a virus that behaves very much like the field viruses, but without the safety problems. Okay, so efficacy-wise, we've been able to avoid diminishing the efficacy of the virus through passage. And that, I think, is why it's able to behave and break through maternal antibody very effectively. So that's what really is giving it its astonishing properties at breaking through maternal antibody. It's that it behaves very, very much like a field virus in terms of its efficacy. But safety is already built into it, so we didn't have to passage it to achieve safety.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Probably second question relates to the previous one to some extent, because colleague is asking what makes this new vaccine able to start protecting within only 3 days. It's really unique. It's incomparable with other vaccines on the market. So is it the explanation of this, or you can comment on this or add something more?
And it's another great question, and one that we obviously get asked by other colleagues in other countries, and it's essentially a similar answer. You're right. So part of the superior efficacy profile that we've got for this vaccine, and that not only includes the ability to break through very high levels of maternal antibody, but also its very rapid onset of immunity of only 3 days. That's all part of the profile of the vaccine, and it's because of the fact that we haven't attenuated it classically, and we haven't diminished the efficacy of the vaccine in any way. So this virus, from an efficacy point of view, is behaving very much like a field strain with a very rapid onset of immunity attached to that. But I must admit that the 3 days was, I probably shouldn't say this, but it was actually unexpected for us as well. When we tested this vaccine, when we developed the virus, we were looking for something that was going to break through very high levels of maternal antibody. That was our target. But when we tested it and when we did the challenge studies, we saw that it was also establishing an extremely rapid onset of immunity. And so we tested it, and we imagined that we might get something that had a 5-day onset of immunity, which would in any case be better than our existing 7-day onset of immunity. But we saw that it was working so swiftly that we were able to challenge only 3 days after vaccination and get full protection. I mean, that's not just some pups being protected, that's full clinical protection and full prevention of shedding. So it's achieving full efficacy only 3 days afterwards. So that was it. We don't know the full details, but I'm sure it's connected with the fact that it's because it's behaving very much like a field virus, as I said, except it's a safe version. And I think that's not only giving us the breakthrough of maternal antibody, but also the very rapid onset of immunity.
Great. We can say that immunity gap has almost no chance when using this vaccine.
We don't really see any immunity gap, as I showed in the graph. I mean, it's breaking through levels of maternal antibody that are still protective, still very much protective. So these puppies, they've not got a chance to have any gap in their immunity. Because this vaccine breaks through such high levels of maternal antibody that it should provide protection in puppies that are still well protected by their level of maternal antibody.
Great, David. And now, very important question is coming, important for all our countries, because veterinary colleagues, especially those who are dealing with big breeders or shelters, they are asking if this vaccine is able to deliver protection in 3 days in all cases, in all animals, no matter what is the immunological status of this animal. In dogs of unknown origin, in dogs which are held in environment with higher concentration of animals where infectious pressure is simply very high. I know you touched this point during your presentation, but still, can you again clearly say what we can expect here in these cases?
Yeah, and that's another great question, and that's a really important question because it's important that people understand, and we don't get misunderstandings about this ability of the vaccine, this 3-day onset of immunity. So the first point that I should say, and what I mentioned in the presentation, is that when we measure the onset of immunity of a vaccine, whether it's this vaccine or any other vaccine, these studies are always carried out in puppies with no maternal antibody. okay, because we're measuring the ability of the vaccine to stimulate a rapid immunity in a puppy, and it's done at minimal dose, and it's done in the youngest age of puppy that we vaccinate, but it's always done in puppies with no interfering levels of maternal antibody, because we're looking to see the pure performance of the vaccine and how rapidly it can stimulate immunity. So obviously, in very young puppies which have maternal antibody, then we're not looking at a 3-day onset of immunity. But the importance there is that this vaccine will stimulate very rapid immunity in puppies with no maternal antibody. And that's a really important property of the vaccine, because in some cases, and we've seen situations in the field where there'll be kennels with outbreaks of parvovirus, and young puppies are going down with disease. And part of the problem in these cases is often that there is a failure of maternal antibody transfer for one reason or another. And I talked about the various factors that could influence that. But we often see outbreaks of parvovirus in puppies that have actually no or very, very low levels of maternal antibody due to some problem in the kennels. And the beauty of this and the relevance here is that we have a vaccine now that in these puppies will stimulate a very rapid onset of immunity. So it's going to be very useful for use in these situations where there's puppies with low or no levels of maternal antibody, and in those cases we will see a very rapid onset of immunity will appear. So that's really just a property of the vaccine that makes it ideal for these outbreak situations or uses where you want to instill very rapid protection in puppies or older dogs which haven't got any maternal antibody levels. And that's not an uncommon situation. I've seen many examples of kennel outbreaks where that is the case. But in puppies with high levels of maternal antibody, of course, these puppies probably aren't going down with disease because they've got protective levels of maternal antibody. But what this vaccine will do is it will break through and it will stimulate an active immunity. But we don't see a 3-day onset of immunity in those animals. It takes a little longer depending on the level of maternal antibody. But it will stimulate an active immunity after just one dose in puppies from 4 weeks of age, whatever the level of maternal antibody against parvovirus.
Great. Okay. David, other questions. Some clients, when looking into our SPC, they are kind of challenging us regarding duration of immunity of this vaccine. Yeah. When they compare it with other products available on our markets, they see it as a quite weak, because we stayed only 8 weeks, while other competitors, they stayed 12 months, which is extremely short. Can you comment this?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and it's good that you've asked that, because I need to explain. And that the reason we've only got 8 weeks duration of immunity claim is because this is a puppy vaccine. It's intended for use as the first dose of vaccine in puppies between 4 and 6 weeks of age. That's the target group. And these puppies would always be receiving later vaccination as part of their normal primary course. So we don't intend it that this is the only vaccine that puppies would get and they just go out from 12 weeks of age with nothing else. They should always receive further vaccinations, and that will include further parvovirus vaccinations. Okay, so because this is a puppy vaccine, it's a DP plus, like our existing puppy DP. It effectively is an upgraded version, a replacement for the puppy DP vaccine. So you use it in the same way. And we didn't carry out long DOI studies at this stage because we knew that this vaccine was never going to be the final dose of the primary course. So you don't need to have a 1 year or even a 3-year duration claim. Having said that, this is a very effective parvo strain, and I'm sure that when we carry out those studies, we will see similar long duration of immunity associated with this. I should absolutely say that the 8-week duration of immunity is very much an artificial figure based on the fact that that's all we've done. We only looked at protection 8 weeks after vaccination. We didn't test it any later. That's not because it only lasts 8 weeks at all. I should absolutely make that clear. We fully expect that this vaccine will have a similar long duration of immunity if it's used in older puppies or adult dogs. as for all the other live parvovirus vaccines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Another question. I had an interesting discussion with one colleague who is quite precise when reading SPCs, and he noticed that when comparing titers of our current Novivac Puppy DP and Novivac DP Plus, that these titers are lower. And you know what is the rule when comparing vaccines? In some cases, in some veterinary practices, the higher titer means better vaccine, higher quality. Where is the reality? Why this new vaccine has lower titer than Novivac Puppy DP?
Yeah, and I know I've seen these comments for some time already, many years. We've seen comments about people saying how good they refer to these as the high titer vaccines, and these were originally the vaccines that, of course, were introduced and able to break through maternal antibody. And if you compare it with our existing 154 strain, that's a vaccine which has been referred to as a high titer vaccine, because the amount of virus in each dose is at a very high titer of 10 to the 7. So our 154 is at 10 to the 7. But the amount of virus that we have in the new DP Plus vaccine with the 630A strain is much lower. It's around 10 to the 5. And so 2 logs lower, that's a lot lower in terms of the amount of virus. And I think this just illustrates that you can't compare different vaccines, the different parvovirus vaccines, just on the basis of the titer, the amount of virus that there is per dose. Because, and what we've shown very clearly here, is that this 630 strain, at a much lower titer, a much lower amount of virus per dose, actually produces a superior response in terms of maternal antibody. It clearly is a better strain, a much more effective strain, and it breaks through much higher levels of maternal antibody than our 154 strain, that's for sure. And it's doing so at a lower titer, at a lower amount of virus per dose. So this just shows you very clearly that the virus titer is something that's very specific to the strain of virus you've got in your vaccine. You can't compare really between different virus strains. So I think that neatly illustrates the difficulties and the reason you should not compare different vaccines just on the amount of virus that they have, because the performance of different virus strains can be dramatically different, as we've shown here.
Okay. Another very interesting question, which was raised by a colleague who is dealing with dogs in shelters. He's asking if you would suggest any difference in vaccination scheme, usual vaccination scheme done in dogs which are held under let's say normal conditions. Would you consider any differences in revaccination interval, or using Novivac DP Plus different time than usually? No, not really.
No. I think I mean it's got a definite place in many breeding establishments, and also in young puppies as well, in a shelter situation, because you don't know what the MDA status is very often in those pups. They may come from an unknown background and history in terms of disease risk. So I would certainly say there's a strong case for using the DP Plus vaccine because of the performance of the components, particularly the new parvovirus component. But you should still be vaccinating puppies at that sort of age interval of around 4 to 6 weeks. This is what this vaccine is designed for, and this is where it's working most effectively and much better than many other vaccines, as we saw in the studies. So it should be used essentially in the same way, I would say, using it for vaccination of those very young puppies at 4 to 6 weeks of age. That's where you're getting the biggest advantage from having this new parvo component in terms of its ability to break through maternal antibody.
Great. David, in light what you mentioned regarding onset of immunity in MDA positive puppies, can you recommend early socialization starting from 3 days after vaccination even in very young puppies?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question, because we get asked a lot about socialization, and a lot of people have obviously had concerns about whether they should socialize puppies, because obviously there's a concern that those puppies are then put at risk of disease before they can be fully vaccinated. And I don't think this vaccine, what it does is it provides much better breakthrough of parvovirus maternal antibody. And parvovirus is probably one of the biggest concerns people have when they're socializing puppies, because these puppies, can very easily come into contact, and it's a big concern for many people who are socializing puppies. So I appreciate that. And this vaccine will give much more reassurance to people that the puppy is protected, and it's breaking through MDA much earlier, and it's giving much more certainty about the fact that puppies will have responded to that initial dose of vaccine at 4 to 6 weeks. So normally socialization would probably take place a bit later than that. I mean, perhaps from 7 weeks, 8 weeks of age for sure. And you should just use the normal socialization program that you would use for that age of puppy. I think what happens is people worry a lot about socializing puppies and the risks of disease, and I understand that. But it's also important that these puppies are properly socialized, because we have a far bigger problem otherwise with poorly socialized young adult dogs and aggression and all this sort of thing, which we know about. So, but what we always say is that if you're going to socialize puppies, do it sensibly, do it in a relatively safe environment. We don't want to increase the disease risks for those animals, so people should do it like that. And many veterinary practices offer puppy parties and socialization classes where they get groups of puppies together of a similar age, and that's fine, because those puppies are examined and healthy by the veterinary practice, and they're usually vaccinated, at least got a single dose of vaccine before they undertake puppy socialization. And I think the advantage here is that we've got a vaccine that is able to break through much higher levels of maternal antibody against parvovirus. So if they're vaccinated with DP+, then that just gives that much more reassurance to people that these puppies are likely to be protected and have an active immunity. So I think it fits into socialization, but I wouldn't necessarily put any time frame on it in terms of you should start socialization 3 days after the vaccine. I think you should just follow your normal socialization program, but using this vaccine will definitely give you a much more peace of mind, much more reassurance that you've got a vaccine that will break through maternal antibody and will stimulate a protective immunity against parvovirus compared with many other vaccines available.
Very good. I see very similar question landed to question box. So we just answered it. David, probably last question, a very interesting one, a specific one. It came from Romania, I think. Is there a reason for administering immunoglobulins before administration of the vaccine? Because there are few vets in that region who are doing this. Can you comment this procedure, this practice?
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I've heard about this, but it's not something I've come across commonly. But I guess the rationale for that is that the puppies may have low levels of maternal antibody, or may have varying levels of maternal antibody, perhaps. And by giving immunoglobulins, they're trying to even it out and make it give them a bit more maternal antibody for the ones that haven't got it, perhaps, and just make a more even group of puppies in terms of their passive antibody levels, let's say. And I can understand perhaps the rationale for doing it, but I certainly wouldn't suggest that it's needed. If you're seeing big disease problems in puppies that are younger than 4 weeks, in other words, you've got, let's say, virtually no maternal antibody, so very, very poor levels, then you might want to consider it to provide some degree of protection for those puppies, because the earliest age we can vaccinate with DP+ is 4 weeks. So if you're getting disease problems in even younger puppies than that, then of course you may have to do something different until you can vaccinate them. But the benefit perhaps of this vaccine is that its ability to break through passive immunity, passive antibody, and it will probably be no different if it's immunoglobulin compared to natural maternal antibody. That means that you've got a vaccine that is probably going to be better at breaking through the passive immunity that you've instilled. So again, it should provide an advantage, I think. We've not tested it in puppies given artificial passive antibody, I should say, but I see no need to do that unless you have disease problems in puppies from birth or from a very young age. But this vaccine, I don't see that it's necessary to use passive antibody immunoglobulin before vaccinating. But this sounds like it's I'd like to know more, I think, from these people about exactly why they're administering the antibody, because there could be a number of reasons, and whether they're actually seeing big disease problems in this premises. So that's one, I think, which rather than give a generic answer, it's probably going to be easier if we talk to people on a one-to-one basis and just understand, what their needs are. But I don't see any real need to do that unless there's a particular problem that I'm not aware of. So that's one, I think, which we need to discuss.
Okay, definitely we will reach out to that colleague through our Romanian colleagues, and we will try to investigate more what's the reason behind of such practice. So let me check question box. I see another question which has been already answered. So no other are coming in. Colleagues, any other questions or experience you would like to share? If not, I really would like to thank you, David. It was great presentation and great to see your expertise and that you were able to share with us your experience and standpoints. I would like also to thank the audience, all colleagues who attended. Again, be informed that this webinar was recorded, and soon it will be available on our company website. I also would like to encourage you, don't hesitate to ask us in the field some questions, sharing experience with this new vaccine, share it with our MSD Animal Health veterinary consultants, because we are here to help you, to support you in any situation. So thanks again. I wish you a great evening, healthy patients, happy and satisfied clients, and hopefully see you soon at the next MSD Animal Health webinar. Have a nice evening, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thanks for the audience for their great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.